What's up everyone, it's Q from RetroQ Gaming, and I've got some great news if you are a PS4 Pro owner or someone who is looking to invest in a PS4 Pro at some point soon. So first off, real quick, back in November of 2016, Sony released the PS4 Pro. It's essentially, we'll call it slightly upgraded PS4, which will play select games if they receive PS4 Pro patches or PS4 Pro support at potentially better resolutions, better frame rates, more steady frame rates. They could have graphical settings turned up or improvements or, previous enhancements that weren't available on the base PS4. And unfortunately, the lack of support and the amount of support and features and everything it's drawn has been pretty underwhelming. As a PS4 Pro owner myself, I've had basically next to no experience with PS4 Pro supported games because, like I said, games do have to be the developer or publisher, whoever, they have to actually go and get someone to make a patch to take advantage of that support. And a lot of games not many games have come out since the PS4 Pro's launch, but all the games beforehand, a lot of developers and a lot of publishers didn't want to put in the time, effort, money, development resources, etc. to actually get it done. So they just said, fuck it. Now, it was pretty underwhelming to say the least, okay? I know as more and more games come out in the post PS4 Pro launch, more and more games will get the support, especially with the Xbox One Scorpio being available at the end of this year, hopefully. More and more companies will likely release them with patches on day one or support from day one. I know there's day one patches, but we'll call it support from day one. Now, the big thing and the big change about this as far as PS4 Pro support goes in its own kind of essence, it's a very welcome one, and it comes kind of in a stealth patch slash update in the PS4's firmware in the version 4.5, which is currently being beta tested by, well, probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of PS4 owners at this point. But one thing that was not originally announced in the actual, whatever we call them, insider patches or anything like that. So, like I said, it wasn't mentioned in there, but then a couple of people were looking through the systems and the settings and all that, and they found something called boost mode, which could manually be enabled or disabled. Now, real quick, I'm going to read exactly what it says on the option, as well as I'll have it on the screen right here. As you can see, it's going to say, experience improved gameplay, including higher frame rates for some games that were released before the introduction of PS4 Pro, and then it has the SKU for the PS4 Pro. Turn this off if you experience unexpected behavior during gameplay. So a lot of people were experimenting, I should say, with that particular mode. Specifically, as like it says, in games released prior to the PS4 Pro's launch. And not just, and we'll go an extra step further, specifically in games that have not been patched to work with a PS4 Pro. And results have been pretty positive. So that's a good thing. A lot of people are reporting games that had a frame rate cap but did not maintain these caps could maintain them, or, well, they could maintain them a lot more frequently, or they could get closer to it, or just keep it the whole time. So eventually, with all this info coming out and, all the boost mode videos being uploaded to YouTube and stuff like that, Sony eventually came out and confirmed that boost mode is a feature of the 4.5 update for the PS4's firmware. So here's the official line from Sony on it. So, boost mode lets PS4 Pro run at a higher GPU and CPU clock speed for smoother gameplay on some PS4 games that were released before the launch of PS4 Pro and have not been updated to support PS4 Pro. Games that have a variable frame rate may benefit from a higher frame rate, and load times may be shorter in some games too. So basically what it means is any games that were CPU bound and restricted by I'm going to say this, and this applies to the Xbox One as well, the CPU in both these consoles is very underwhelming and it's very underpowered, even in the PS4 Pro and potentially the Xbox One Scorpio. We'll see how that goes. There's no details on it, but at the end of the day, no matter what you do to it, it is a very poor choice, if you will, for gaming for a CPU. Now, I'm not ragging on it. We'll move away from that just because it's not going to sound positive, you know? So basically, it will run the CPU and GPU at the higher clock speeds, which usually are locked and turned off if the game has not specifically been patched for PS4 Pro. Now, one thing to note as well, okay, is games that are patched for the PS4 Pro will likely run better than games that are just using boost mode. So, if you have a PS4 Pro game, or let's say you're playing a game that's not patched for PS4 Pro and you turn on boost mode, you'll get probably a bit better results than you would on the base PS4. And then let's say a couple of months later that game is recoded and a PS4 Pro dedicated patch is released for it. The PS4 Pro patch, I know this is all very confusing with all the PS4s and all, that PS4 Pro patch will likely give you much better results than just boost mode. And don't forget, boost mode will not give you any of the features that would possibly be added in a PS4 Pro patch. You're not going to get better draw distances. You're not going to get better graphics. You're not going to get improved resolution unless the game has a dynamic frame rate, which is affected by either the CPU or the GPU. In that particular case, it might, if it's dynamic, and let's say it's a dynamic game at 1080p, but it spends the majority of the game at 900p, you might see a larger portion of time closer to 1080p, if that makes sense. So it does to me anyway. So you've got tons of people out there anyway, that are running all types of games with unlocked frame rates. Actually, that's one thing I almost forgot to mention. If a game has a frame rate that is, say, let's just say capped at 30 FPS, you will not go above 30 FPS. If the game is capped at 30 and maybe it stutters a little bit when there's heavy action and all, you will likely maintain 30 more often. If you have a game that runs consistently in like the low 20s, looking at you, Assassin's Creed Unity, you will likely, I'm not saying 100% sure, but you will likely get consistently higher frame rates. You might not achieve a smooth 30, you might get a relatively constant 30 that does dip a little bit. It's hard to say. It varies on game to game. And it's good to see that this is actually happening for the simple reason is that now, or previously, the PS4 Pro did not feel very pro. The fact that it had to be on developers to do select games with select improvements, and even older games didn't have any benefits whatsoever, it was very lackluster and very underwhelming. Now, this is likely to change all that in a big way, if you ask me. Because like I said, I'm a PS4 Pro owner. I felt very, very shorted and very slighted by games that specifically took advantage of the PS4 Pro. I believe I have 2 games. I've got about 20-something PS4 games. And I believe I have 2 games that support PS4 Pro. Even one, I will argue one of them not even properly, because it's Final Fantasy 15. It has basic PS4 Pro modes on its day one patch, but it also will be getting the proper PS4 Pro treatment on the 21st of February this month. So I think this is great. I'm personally, believe it or not, going to go back once this patch fully comes out and it's the standard firmware, it's not just in beta anymore. I'm actually going to go back to a few of my older games. Killzone Shadowfall, not a great game by any means, but it was a huge game that had an issue with a wild frame rate, and it was an unlocked frame rate as well, because off the top of my head anyway, I haven't played it since 2013 when the PS4 first launched, but if I remember right, you could like run down a small corridor and your game would be running at 60 FPS or almost 60 FPS. Again, I could be wrong, the game could have a 30 FPS cap for all I remember. It's been that long. But then I remember when you get out in the open and all, the frame rate noticeably dived and it was considerably slower and all, which is to be expected. But I'd like to see, actual improvement and see how the difference is. I might play it just before the patch comes out and then after, and just use it as a comparison, as well as a couple of other games. Because at the end of the day, this is a win for Sony. So this is positive press for Sony. It's like, hey, we have this more powerful console than our base version. We touted it as having more power and making your games look and run better. Here is it doing that, instead of here is it doing that in one of 20 games that developers could be bothered to do. So this is promising. I'm happy about this. Personally, I think it's the kind of thing that should have been in from day one. And even though I play a lot of Borderlands 2 on PC, I'm definitely going to try out Borderlands, the Handsome Collection, the Borderlands 2 in that, because fuck the pre-sequel. I'm definitely going to be trying that on the PS4. I have it on the PS4. Obviously, there's no PS4 Pro patch for Borderlands 2, but it does have a 60 FPS cap. It does not maintain it. I want to see if this does a better job of keeping it either closer to 60 FPS or 60 FPS more often. It's going to be interesting to see how it works. One thing I will note as well, that the very last thing before we wrap up this video, is that they do give a warning in the boost mode thing. It does say turn this off if you experience unexpected behavior during gameplay. This is to be expected. Now, it's not to say that it's going to happen. It's not to say that it's going to be wild and rampant. It's essentially, when you look at it, it's basically overclocking your hardware. Or it's not exactly the same thing as what I'm about to say, but exceeding, I don't want to say exceeding a frame rate cap, because that's not what the game is going to do. Some games have things tied to physics, or some games have engines which have physics tied to frame rates, and they have calculations tied to frame rates and things like that, and it can affect that. So here's a perfect example. When I play LA Noire on PC, that game is capped at 30 FPS. Now, you can remove that cap or you can bypass it, but it can break the game. Dead Rising 3 on PC is another example of this. It is also capped at 30 FPS. You can easily remove the 30 FPS cap using a hack or a mod, or it's basically a small little change. I wouldn't even call it a hack or a mod, but you can remove this thing. Now, because of how calculations and things like that are actually, well, calculated in both of these games, I've had big issues with things like this happening before. So I'll give you a quick example. LA Noire, when I removed the frame cap, what happened is I was driving down the road, everything was going pretty well, everything looked great at 60 FPS, it's still a nice looking game, and whatever way I hit the curb, like I was driving parallel to the curb, and I must have been veering in at like a 5-degree angle, so it was a very, very slight angle. And my car hit the curb, and I literally rocketed about 100 miles up in the air, to the point where I could rotate the camera down, I couldn't even see the map. I just rocketed straight up. So it was things like that. Dead Rising, the same kind of thing. You'd hit a zombie, they'd go crazy, they'd bounce all over the place, and it would really affect stuff. Like it would send like cars flying through walls, and if a zombie that I directly hit came in contact with an item, that item would like fall through the ground, and the physics calculations for it would start going crazy. It would be bouncing around everywhere, up and down from underneath the ground. It's just one of those things that happens. Now, it's one of the risks you take, essentially, when overclocking hardware or removing caps, or essentially caps that are in place. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. I'm not saying this is what always happens. This is just my personal experience with it, and it is that this kind of thing can happen, which is good that Sony warned people about this. If you're not too familiar with it, hopefully I'm informing you about this and you can make an educated decision about it. And it's nice that they give you the option to turn this on and off. I know personally, like I said, I'm going to turn boost mode on straight away as soon as I get 4.5 and try a bunch of games. So I'm going to see how they all work. Hopefully this has been pretty helpful if you have a PS4 Pro, if you're considering getting a PS4 Pro, or you just kind of keep up with it and want to see how Sony are doing, whatever, anything like that. Let me know all that kind of stuff in the comment section below. Anything to do with what you think of boost mode, or the PS4 Pro, or Xbox One Scorpio, it fits in the same kind of vein, essentially. Let me know all that in the comment section below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You can follow me on Twitter, details in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the rest of the videos in my channel.